We will now call the street committee, I'm sorry. We will now call the Budget and Public Employees Committee budget hearings to order. It is now 9:30 on May the 29th.
May 30th.
May 30th. I'm sorry. I got papers everywhere. May 30th in the Kennedy Room. And so we will call the meeting to order, and we will call a recess until 11 o'clock a.m.
We can call the Budget and Public Employees meeting back to order. Madam Clerk, do we need to call a roll since we did that earlier?
We did not.
Oh, we did not call roll, okay. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Oldenburg.
Present.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Present.
Alderwoman Sanier.
Present.
Alderman Aldrich.
Present.
Chair Spencer.
Present.
Alderwoman Boyd. We have 5 present. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. And our Vice Chair just walked in, so please make note. Alderwoman Boyd is present. With that, we have just one item on our agenda today, that is Board Bill number 1, and we will be hearing again from our Street Department. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning once again. We are here for the second hearing of the Streets Department FY23 budget that we submitted. We had a list of maybe about 4 items that we were asked to come back and present more information or give some more clarity on. And so we are going to, each of us will speak to those issues for our respective divisions that we're responsible for. And then we could come back with final questions for myself if you have any as the director.
Okay, Director, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure.
And we'll have everybody just, for clarity.
Sure. Bethany Williams, Director of Streets.
Thank you.
Yes. So first I want to talk about, one of the first items was the personnel that were shifted from the toll lot 513 because they showed a difference in the numbers. And so I wanted to point out that we did have an increase in drivers. We asked for 1 more additional driver, which we did receive, as well as the dispatchers were relocated to the 510 budget. And that is because the dispatchers from traffic as well as the dispatchers from City Toll have been relocated to the 510 so that they could be more of a general service to the whole department instead of one division. So that was for a total of 8 to be transferred to the Streets Director's Office budget 510, and it's only showing 4. So that was the only change that from the toll division that we saw. I have also contacted the capital campaign, or the capital committee. So we have additional fleet that have been ordered. That's where our fleet is ordered through. And so they will receive fleet later this summer or the first of the fall. Additional fleet for City Toll as well. So you would not see any fleet services in the 513 budget. Those were the 2 action items for 513 that I had. And do we have any questions for those?
Director, just for clarity, so with 513, if I'm looking at budget 513, last year budget was 2.4 million. This year's budget for City Tow is 2.2 million. And there's a reduction in the general positions from 29 to 26. Is there a decrease in function for that department? Okay.
No decrease in function, just one of the job titles, which I call them dispatchers. Let me get the official name.
We have a decrease in revenue projected for the department.
So it's a decrease in 513, but those positions have been added to 510. So that's why you see only 4 on the budget, and that was what I was asked to come back and speak to. We asked for a total of 8 to be transferred to 510, and he only transferred 4 from traffic department. So traffic had 4, and City Tow had 4 of that position, and so it should have been a total of 8 that were transferred to the streets department. The function will stay the same. They will still do the same work for City Tow. They just will do a combination of dispatch work for the towing division as well as the traffic division.
I'll turn it over to members of the committee. Do we have any questions? Vice Chair Boyd.
No, I don't have any right now.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Yes. Thank you, Director, for being here.
Yes.
Is there a need, I know there's a need for more tow trucks, probably more tow truck drivers, but is there also an increasing demand for tow truck space, lot space?
So yes, we are actually looking for a new facility at this point, which we will present to Paul Payne and the Capital Committee to look for a new facility. We haven't identified one, but what you will see in the budget is increased funds to increase the safety of the facility, to look at how can we maximize the space that we do have until we're able to find a new facility that we can put more cars onto the property. So as far as the drivers, yes, we have seen a shortage in drivers, but we are working with the union. They have come back with an agreement, and it has not been voted upon as of yet, but we do believe that that will come through and it will pass, that an increase in tow driver, their salary, and from there, then it's anticipated that we will get more drivers in at that point.
And I was speaking to the chairwoman about this earlier, so I'm really stealing her ideas and questions here. But the breakdown that continues to happen, I think, is that derelict cars remain right on our taxpayer streets for far too long. And I know it's a multiple faceted issue. But are the police the only ones that can call in a car to be removed? No.
No,
Anyone can call the dispatch at the tow yard.
So they have a process through CSB that they put them in, and actually we had a meeting this morning to identify a plan, because it really encompasses 2 divisions. 510 is where our inspectors are, and then City Tow is who actually performs the towing service and the storage of the vehicles. And so identifying how do we change the narrative of what the city is used to because of the number of drivers we have, as well as the capacity issue that we're facing. So right now, we're looking at how can I get a subcontractor, and if it's some land that I can lease that's safe and secure, that we can pull these vehicles and put them somewhere. Those are all options that I'm currently looking at to get these derelict vehicles off of the streets. But, derelict vehicles are low on our priority list of tow. We have accidents and police fatalities, things of that nature that we have to get off the roads, and so that's always our #1 priority, but we do our best, and so we are trying to identify a plan now to remove these vehicles that have been sitting for an extended period of time.
And currently the process is, and I'm trying to figure out a way of more resources can get to an apparatus that brings a solution, but currently the process is either a CSB request goes in and an inspector from the streets department inspects to ensure that the car is in fact either derelict or not, and then furthers that request on to the towing division.
Yeah, so they go out and tag.
Or the police can perform a derelict car removal.
Right.
Through the same channels of communication?
Well, really, a derelict vehicle, if a police officer should be calling City Tow, if they have a vehicle that needs to be towed away.
Purposes or whatever.
Yeah, for whatever reason, they can contact a City Tow immediately.
Okay.
And then we will put that on the priority list because it is coming from a police officer, that vehicle will be towed away as soon as possible.
Feel that more resources can be given to more inspectors? Or
So we're actually at capacity of our inspectors filling our TO now.
Okay.
For a couple, well, since I've been here, I've seen that we haven't even been able to fill out our TO. So asking for more inspectors or more spaces on the TO when we haven't been able to fill out all 12 positions, or in the case of inspectors, we're now at a place where we're at capacity of our inspectors, and now just giving them them the opportunity to do the work. I think this year, if we could see if that's working, and then if I need more inspectors from there, I definitely will request them in the future.
And just to put a bow on it, there will be a capital committee request for an upgrade to the current facility, tow yard, plus an expansion or a new.
Yes, moving further, we will have a request for that. Right now, we just put did some work to the roof on the building. We're building a retaining wall to secure the property more, and now I'm looking at doing some asphalt work to the lot and striping to kind of guide where parking and maximize the space until we can find something else.
Okay. Any idea what that ask approximate might be for both the upgrades as well as a new
So right now in the budget, I think it's 25,000 or 35, which and it's for the next few years. So right now it's just the fencing, and then we will do additional lighting and cameras on the yard, and then we will look for a new facility. But I could imagine that a new facility probably will cost us something in the millions.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes,
I have no
thank you.
further questions, Joan.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am interested in what improvements are being made to the refuse facilities as well, if any, if you can speak to that. Or
I think we'll stick to tow right now, just to go through that, and then we'll go to the next set.
Okay, then
if that's
I'm good on tow.
Okay.
Okay.
Alderwoman Saunier?
Oh, thank you. Were you gonna say something?
No.
Oh, sorry. You said that you guys were looking for possible locations, but you haven't been able to find one yet?
Yeah, so we started last year the LUSTAT program with the mayor's office, and one of the things that came out of that was identifying a facility, a new facility. I think I proved the case in the story that a new facility is needed, more space for capacity purposes are needed, and so, we were asked to start looking for properties. We have to be very careful where we place a tow lot. You don't want it in a residential area or something of that nature. It's something that should be industrial. So we've been looking on the riverfront, looking at some of our partners, our neighbors, to where we currently sit, if they're wanting to move across the street. We saw some property there, but then they end up paying taxes and became current and didn't want to sell. There was a property down the street that would give us more acreage, but then they sold to someone else. So it's just trying to identify a place that we can move. So we are actively looking for that.
So if we were interested in just looking as a committee at how we could support that, I guess my question is, if we don't have a location, how would we go about identifying how much that would be? Did you have any ranges or see any common costs, or maybe you can send to us places you have looked at so we can get an idea of what that cost and allocation might look like?
So typically the locations that we've looked at, they've been in $2-3 million for the property. In some places we found that they had a building that we just had to kind of like renovate the building, so we didn't have to worry about building a structure. So those are places that we're trying to identify, but I will send what we've looked at so far, and then you all can see exactly what that range looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director, for coming back. I actually just have a question about some in streets. That's an ordinance, not necessarily the tow.
Okay.
So, and I know I have a 12, so I'll be.
Yeah, we'll cycle through that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask?
Sure, Alderwoman Boyd.
I'm just kind of confused because Alderman Oldenburg said it was a process either with CSB or the police in regards to dirty cars. So I'm kind of confused because it seems like it's a breakdown somewhere, because even if police are putting the tags on the cars, even up to green tags, the cars are still sitting there. And so when I talk to the police, and they'll tell me that if they contact tow to come get a car, they have to wait 2 to 3 hours to get the car. And so my confusion is, one, is that a good way to utilize our police, to have them sitting there for 2 or 3 hours waiting on a tow? And then two, it's a breakdown somewhere, because even if they put it in CSB, I got cars been sitting for over a year on the street. So it's a breakdown somewhere, and I don't know if you and the police and the tow lot need to come together to try to figure out how to improve their process, or I don't know. And so it's a safety issue to me when you have these cars that are sitting, and most of the cars that are sitting either don't have tires, they're sitting on jacks, and they've been sitting so long where the street cleaner, you can see where they have went around the car and it's just been sitting there. So have you all thought of coming up with a better process, or?
So, yes, that's what, we had a meeting this morning, and as well as we have continuously tried to figure out how do we fix this process that we're currently in. Like I said before, a priority for city tow and picking up derelict vehicles is not our number one priority. We have accidents, we have hit and run in the middle of an intersection, on the highway. These types of things are happening every day, all day. And so our drivers are constantly running, getting those vehicles with the number of drivers that we have. We asked for an increase of 1 driver because it was 12 before, and now it's 13. So before, we didn't even have 12 drivers. You were looking at 2 drivers per shift. Some shifts only had 1 driver on them. So that priority is going to be removing vehicles from accidents or blocking the intersection or things of that nature, and that could take them all night to do. So we are trying to find a process that we can pick these vehicles up. They have been low on our priority list, and so now I'm trying to figure out a process to move them up so that they can be removed. But with our current state, they are still low on the priority list. And so this morning we had a meeting to start that discussion with how do we get these 700 plus vehicles across the city removed, and then once we do that, is it one sweep that I do, but then how do you continuously do it so we don't fall back in this hole again, is what I want to make sure we have a process of. So we are currently working on how do we fix that breakdown in communication, because a cop, like you said, they will call and they will sit there until the tow truck comes. But if that one tow truck for that night is out clearing interstates or crashes somewhere around the city, then they would sit there. And we don't want our officers sitting there, but if this is the situation that we're given, then we just have to work within our means.
Well, I do know that, because I spoke to some of the police officers, and they had came up with some ideas, so that's why I was asking, because I didn't know if you all were throwing ideas across to each other to say, well, maybe we could try this, or we could do this, because the derelict cars are becoming a safety issue to me. And so it's not just in the community that I'm overseeing, but it's communities all through the city. And so especially when they're in residential areas, and my fear is, now it's hot, and so the temperature is up to 90, and so I don't want a child or an animal in those cars, and they're just sitting there. So that's why I was trying to figure out, was it a process, or we're trying to a pilot or something to do to address the derelict cars? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director. Just a couple quick questions, a couple things to note. When you look at this, the revenue that we bring in from city tow is greater than the expense to the city. So I just want to remind everyone that, $1 in to this department is $1 well spent. We do recoup every single dollar and then some from city tow. So, it is discouraging to hear the number 700 vehicles. I was curious if you could share with us. We don't know a lot about LUSTAT. I've heard some rumblings about it. If you could share with us the number of vehicles that we're aware of through CSB that are in the street, is that a 700 figure accurate?
Yes, it was 725.
700, so there's 725 vehicles
That was as of
citywide.
this morning, yes.
That is, what is the capacity, current capacity at our tow lot?
The current capacity is right at 1,000.
1,000, okay. And then what is, how many do we have right now?
1,300.
We have 1,300 right now? Okay, yeah. So we're well beyond capacity. And even with the weekly sales and all that?
With
Okay.
weekly sales, yeah.
Okay. Have we looked at some of this property that the city already owns, like the CJC or other areas that we currently own for additional storage of vehicles?
Yes, so I've been working with the comptroller's office to identify properties that we own that we possibly could take over the space that is not being utilized. But like I said, if you look at some of the properties, you want to make sure it's in the right area, in the industrial area, because this is a 24/7 operation. And so, you know, you have noise and things of that nature. So we would like for it to be in an industrial area instead of in a community or somewhere like that, that we could be a disturbance to the residents in that area or business owners in that area. Industrial property is the main place that we're really looking.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, it is a revenue generator with the exception of these officers who are stuck, you know, wasting officer time. That's such a humongous expense to all of us and the general function of the city. So we want to help you fix that, you know, in a city that has an enormous amount of vacant land, an increasing number of vacant parcels as we see population loss. You know, we really want to, as Alderwoman Saunier pointed out, you know, support you in this endeavor. It's really important to us that you have the tools that you need. Have we looked into, just curious, contracting out some of the tow, recognizing we didn't have those 12 drivers, and we have looked into that? Is that
Yes,
something?
so that's what currently I am in the process of, once I can identify space.
Okay.
If I can find space, then I can easily put an RFP out for a contract that could help us one time clean the city, if that's what it is, or something that's more long-term.
Okay.
But I just have to make sure I have the space that they could put these vehicles in.
Okay, well, we are here for that. It's been a long identified issue, and we want to make sure that we have a solution in the horizon for that. So with that, you know, one last quick note. We talked about some of the siloing. There's a breakdown between communication. One thing that does have me very concerned by moving these 4 folks from the 513 to the 510 is we've created another silo. We've got on the one hand, the parking administrator is treasurer, which is a completely separate function. Then we have the police, then we have these guys, and now they're in a different department. So we have all these different silos, and it just has me a little concerned moving them over from 513 to 510, as you indicated, it's a separate department, and now we've created another silo for
it's the
a
same-
further breakdown of communication.
So it's the same department, different divisions.
Okay.
So they still all will report. So 510, that is where our payroll specialists are housed, our accountants are housed, our secretary, our executive secretary sits in this office, and they do services for all of the divisions that fall under the streets department. So it's not like they will be in a silo. These will be dispatchers or telecommunicators as they're listed in the TO. These people will service the entire department, just like our inspectors do. They service the entire department, not just one division. So it will be less of a silo and more communication and more people that will be able to do one job function instead of 4, and you have 2 that are out on sick leave, and you don't have people to cover it.
Super helpful. And lastly, I'm sorry, just to bring up this last point, but does the tow division have the capacity to run a VIN number? The reason I ask is we have so many stolen vehicles, and I know we often rely on our police department. Is there any way we could kind of help the tow department have some of that capacity? There's been some discussion going back a couple years on how to deputize our tow truck drivers or folks outside of the police department to run those VINs and
So
understand.
we have the ability to run VINs at the city tow. Currently, I'm actually getting tablets for all of the drivers now so that they could take pictures and just more evidence to help with when they're documenting tolls that they're picking up, those types of things, help with them navigate where they're going, things of that nature. We are putting tablets in those vehicles in the trucks for that, but we do have the ability to run VINs at City Toll.
Okay, excellent. All right, with that, Director, we have covered City Tow. We also want to cover refuse, right? And then, so I know we have maybe some new information on the refuse side, is that right? And then we also want to talk about streets.
So we had questions from refuse, and Randy's here. Jamie is here to talk about some items that you asked for us to bring back for traffic division, and then Kent has some items for the street maintenance.
Okay.
So we can go in whichever order you all want.
Randy, do you have additional information about the contract for refuse removal that you want to talk about, or revisiting the amounts? It's still all out there. Okay, so that's not something we can talk about specifically.
Yeah, you want to talk about the contract for disposal, or?
I thought that's what we were going to maybe discuss today, but that hasn't been solidified.
No.
Okay. So, Director, I will take maybe if you could lead us in the most pressing issue first, and we'll go there, from there.
So we will start with Jamie Wilson with Traffic Division to talk about the item that he had.
Okay. If you don't mind just introducing yourself for the folks at home.
Good morning, I'm Jamie Wilson with the Traffic Division, the Commissioner of Traffic. I believe our action item for the Traffic Division when discussing our budget for fiscal 24 was an issue related to catching up on our knockdown streetlight poles. We currently at the time have 271 service requests for knockdown streetlights, and that's where they've been an accident where somebody came, knocked them over, they need a total replacement. We had it to a good point. We're about 50 or 75 of those were open service requests, and then COVID hit us, and we've never got back caught up since then. So we're currently at 271, and during the discussion a couple weeks ago, the question was posed, how can we catch up? Considering that a one-time catch-up, how can we go about that? I communicated to Madam Chairwoman that we could contract out that service. Right now, we have an on-call emergency repair contract with a local electric contractor. They have a line item on that repair contract for just this thing, and that's a replacement of the Cobra streetlight pole as well as the luminaire. We have the supply of the pole and luminaire, so we just need them for labor only to augment our own forces. Straight line item cost for that would be $271 times $840, which is roughly $228,000. So that would be the answer for a one-time catch-up. Would be an additional $228,000 in our professional services contract, which from the budget you have in front of you, we sit currently at $250,000 budget for fiscal 24, but that $250 was already for engineering services for the people we don't have in the traffic division for engineering. So to answer your question of what it would take, it'd be the $228,000 plus the $250,000 we have in there would be our new budget request for fiscal 24 in that professional services count, which would put us at $478,000 for that one line item.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Commissioner, with that, I'll turn it over to the committee for questions. Alderwoman Boyd.
So you're saying that you would need an additional request for dollars to get those light poles replaced?
Yeah, so currently in our fiscal 24, what you see in front of you was just assuming we're going to keep doing the labor and trying to catch up. But when the question was posed, how can you catch up outside of your own forces in your traditional efforts? We said, well, we could contract it out just to get caught up, and that's where we came up with the 271 pole locations times that line item amount, which equals $228,000 additional for this year that we would be discussing here in front of you guys right now. So that'd be 228,000 plus the 250,000 in that line item for a total of 478,000 in our professional services contract.
And so that's telling us that because you're doing it the one-time thing, it's a staff shortage that's
Yeah, right
causing
now,
it.
the
Yeah.
supplies were kind of the issue before during COVID where nobody in the world could get anything. But now that we have the supplies, we just can't, the guys can't put enough hours in the day to get those poles put back in. We have worked down to a great amount historically, probably a high score in video game world, but now that happened, we're bumped back up to 271, so it's hard to catch up from that. But in order to catch up, that's what we were talking about, this one-time catch-up of hiring a contractor to take the brunt off that, to do that, so we'd be back down to that low number and then be able to more maintain that. We can maintain it, we just can't do warp speed and catch up to it and just wipe that many off.
So how many staff are you down? That's what I'm trying to find out.
We're about 30% vacant. We have 77 in our TO, I think we're showing 55, so that's right around 30% vacancy. So we're hoping to see that improve. The more we hear talks about increased salaries and that kind of stuff is very encouraging, because we want to keep doing this ourselves.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Oldenburg.
No questions.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much. I agree about the importance of replacing poles. I know a lot of poles are down in my ward, so I appreciate you bringing that to light. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Zonier.
No questions at this time.
Alderman Aldridge.
No questions.
Okay, thank you. I just want to acknowledge Alderwoman Boyd for bringing this important issue to our attention and recognizing how important it is to the public safety of our communities to have lights, and getting what you need and asking those questions. So thank you for that. Okay. With that, Director Williams, who's up next? Mr. Flake.
Ken Flake with street maintenance.
Street maintenance, our favorite city service.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name's Ken Flake, Commissioner Streets. I don't know that I had any items really to return to talk about, except I did mention last week that our personnel was a little different on our budget this time, and it wasn't meant to be that way. So I've been working with Paul to get that straightened out, because our FY23 personnel listing should have been the same as our FY24 personnel listing. Somehow with the new Oracle, something got messed up in there. We're still trying to figure that out. The only other thing I had was I'd really like to push the idea that in our 514-1000 account, the number is 522000, which is our patch money. We requested $1,475,000 because our asphalt has went up approximately 25%. Last year we requested $800,000. We were given that last year, and we need that in order to keep patching potholes. Other than that, that's about all I have.
Okay, thank you. So, in other words, the request was for 1.4 million, and we've allocated 800,000 to the pothole material fund. Is that right?
It's $1,475,000. 1,000,475.
Okay, so yeah, that's what I thought. There was a deficit of 200,000 in there.
That's
okay.
correct.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. With that, I'll turn it over to the committee for questions. Alderwoman Boyd.
And so I think I keep asking this. One day I'm going to get an answer. You know, I just keep asking, do we have a plan, a map, or schedule on how we are paving, filling potholes? You know, do we have something in place to know who's on first and who's on second?
I mean, we follow the same priority that we've always followed on potholes. If we have something on a major street, it's number one. If we have something that somebody's claiming property damage from, like a broken axle, for instance, that also gets put on that top tier list. After that, we start working our way down. So anything on a major street or that's causing vehicle incidents, number one. Then we break down to our residentials. The residentials are typically whatever ward, we still do everything off the old wards because it's a little easier for us. But whatever old ward has the most potholes is where that crew's going today, because it's a little more bang for a buck that way. If there's 40 potholes in your ward and 5 in Alderman Oldenburg's ward. We're gonna take care of your 40 first, just because we can take care of 40 that way. And it's essentially, the crew that's working is essentially covering the same area, because your wards were about the same size and kind of sort of are still about the same size comparatively. So it was more bang for our buck to go take out the 40 in your ward versus the 5 in Oldenburg's ward.
And so I guess my confusion is it through the CSB? That's where you are, that's the information that you all are following?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's what I was trying to figure out. And so, you and I have talked several times in regards to the street sinking. And so, it's not so much of you all, and what I see is you all try to fix it, but the problem is bigger than you. So when you keep putting the blacktop in and it keeps sinking, is you working against yourself. So I'm just trying to figure out how we can do that better, because it's just, you know, it's just really frustrating. Because when residents are driving the street and their whole tire is going down in the street, so I'm just trying to figure out, is it another way that we can look at how to do that, or?
Yes, and we actually do now. I mean, and we've done that for almost 10 years now, because I've kind of had inspection underneath my umbrella, at least a little crossover. So if I have a patch crew that goes out, and we'll call it a depression, an area that's just got a dip in it, not a pothole, nothing else. After they go patch that area today, if they have to go patch that area again in a month or a week or however long it might happen to be, that crew typically contacts one of our inspectors, and typically it becomes either a sewer lateral repair or an MSD repair, because if that street's sinking, it's sinking for a reason. It's just not because it's Tuesday.
Right.
So, and that's where we try to get the inspectors on board, and we work with MSD also, trying to figure out the real underlying reason. And sometimes on those, we'll actually go poke a hole in the street with a piece of equipment so we can run dye into hopefully a cavity underneath there and see if it's coming through a sewer lateral or just going straight to the MSD main.
Okay.
But those, of course, take a lot more time than it does to patch a basketball-sized pothole.
Right. And I think I've been doing this so long, I probably could come work for you, because I could tell you what's not just sinking and what is the problem, so.
We have some vacancies, so come on over.
Right. Because I'm like, I could do this job, so thank you. Thanks a lot, Ken.
Not a problem.
Alderman Oldenburg. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much. With the discussion of the streets sinking, I think the sewer lateral program is definitely at the top of my mind. Is that you? Talk to you about this now?
Either one of us.
Okay. You know, I think we talked about in the last meeting that the sewer lateral program request is exactly what's needed for we expect emergency repairs to be. In terms of ongoing routine maintenance, to ever get to that routine maintenance number, what is the number that streets needs yearly to do routine maintenance as well?
Well, as of today, I gotta find my notes here. We have approximately 600 jobs that are in our routine maintenance pile, which is sewer lateral, routine maintenance pile, not emergency, that we're not gonna call out today or any sooner. There's approximately 600 locations. And those have been kind of piling up for a few years.
When was the last time that the streets department did routine maintenance on sewer laterals?
We will do them occasionally currently. So if there's a bad lateral, let's say at X location, and it's an emergency, and we know we have a routine 3 doors down, we will include both those in a package bid for the contractor, because it just makes sense for us. Because their mobility is about $1,000 per location.
Do you notice that when you does it follow then if there's one street that has an emergency sewer lateral repair that you notice other ones popping up around that same area, or is it completely random?
It's pretty common that if you have one pop up, you'll have more, because typically all these neighborhoods were built at the same time, or at least that block was built, every house, a similar time. Like my house was built in 1939. I think every house on my block was built within a couple of years of that. So once one starts to fail, there's possibility for all of them to fail, especially if there's been any construction work or anything else happen there. And part of the time you start getting into city trees also that would play a part in a portion of that. But yes, it's fairly typical that if one goes bad, there's others that are actually bad on that block too.
Okay. Yeah, I would be interested to see how much a goal would be for routine maintenance to happen. Or, I mean, if it's a year, you know, if we don't, how old these sewers are and need to be replaced. I mean, I know I've had some constituents who, you know, it hasn't become an emergency, but their plumber is saying this needs to happen. So what's between routine and emergency? You know, like, this is about to be an emergency? Like, what fund, you know, how do we pay for that? We don't pay for that.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, we actually kind of invented about 2 years ago, I guess the third tier. We had a routine that we know it's a problem, but it doesn't appear to be causing any real issues to infrastructure or to sewage. And then we have an emergency that's got to be, it needs to be done yesterday. And then we kind of had this other caveat, I guess, of this is really bad, but they're not backed up currently. Right. So we kind of invented that tier, but now the emergency and that tier have kind of became the same again. And just to kind of go back real quick, we have, on average over the last year, we're running about $3,300 a sewer for a repair. And you take that times 600, that's a significant amount of money. But that kind of gives you a ballpark what we're talking about, just to get caught up on the routines that we have today. And all those routines, we've been pretty loose historically with those routines. If there was a small crack in the pipe, inspectors it's a lot easier to say yes than no. They tell the homeowner or the real estate or realtor that, oh yes, we're gonna fix it. Either myself, we got a sewer lateral inspector, or inspection supervisor have went back and reviewed every one of those. And so those routines now are actually repairs that do need to be made. They're not these super minor minor issues where an inspector was just easier for him to say yes than no.
All 600 of them you would say would be in the category, or how many of those?
Yes.
Okay, would be.
Yeah, because those were just reviewed about a year ago. So there might be a few in there still that are super minor that I personally would not say should be routine, but there's not many. All of those have been reviewed.
Okay, so these 600 are just about to that second, almost in between. Okay. Thank you so much. Those are my questions. Appreciate it.
Yep, not a problem.
Thank you, Alderwoman Saunier.
Hi, I have a question, but you might not be able to answer it off the top. I was just looking into like some of the things that have been passed, and I had some concerns myself, and one of the things that I saw is something that the former Alderwoman Christine Ingracia passed. It's Ordinance 71157 called Work Zone Mobility Ordinance. And essentially it just looks like it kind of requires an additional overlook into special accommodations that might be necessary when things in zoning are made, but with the mindfulness to mobility for different people. So I was just curious where you all were with, has this been implemented? Is there any staff assigned to it? That type of thing. And I'm happy to email a link to the ordinance or something like that to you all as well, if that's helpful.
Yes, please do. I recall that vaguely, but I do not recall the intricacies of that.
Yeah, some of that will have to do, I think, with private contractors as well, but certainly the cities, any of the work the city does should be in accordance with that as well.
Yeah, I believe that was the intention behind the bill, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. If you could repeat the figure per sewer repair, I missed that.
Yep, currently we have approximately 600 jobs in routine status. Of those jobs, our average over the last year in FY23 for a sewer repair is approximately $3,300.
$3,300. And if you could remind me and the committee how the sewer lateral program is funded?
Yeah, it's funded as part of your real estate tax. There's a $28 essentially sewer lateral insurance fee. That's part of that real estate tax for properties that qualify. So it's got to be 6 units or less. It's got to be residential. If you have a mixed use, as long as there's a residence in that and it's less than 6 units, it will still qualify.
Okay.
So there's approximately 80,000 properties that pay into that at $28 per residence, which is 2.24 million.
2.24 million is what we collect on the fund, and what are we budgeted to spend on the fund?
1.8 is directly to contractors.
1.8 million to contractors. What is that $600,000 difference? What do we do with that?
It should be, I believe, $450,000 difference, but there's a couple inspectors paid for out of that.
Okay.
There's a concrete finisher too paid for out of that. And I guess while I'm standing here, I might as well tell this too. So after last week's meeting, we worked with Bev, or 2 weeks ago, we worked with Bev Fitzsimmons, and those two salary counts, we have a salary count 510 and 514 for the sewer lateral program. We took all the residual money out of those two and dropped it into that 1.8 million, and that should help these contractors get paid out, the ones that have been emailing everyone.
Okay,
And-
that's
and I
very
believe
helpful.
We're going to be okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think Alderman Schweitzer for bringing up this issue. You know, if the $28 on a real estate tax needs to be revisited to take this from 2.4 million to something that we can actually use to address some of the routine maintenance, I think that'd be very helpful to all residents. You know, and so I think we should be considering that as we move forward to make sure that we can properly address these sewer lateral issues. They cave in the streets, do all kinds of things that make the rest of our city function less optimally. So we're here to help you figure out how to increase that, especially if we've got contractors out there and we don't have to necessarily figure out how to hire people quickly. Okay, Commissioner, did you have anything else for us this morning?
I will mention along with that, I believe it's been $28 since its inception.
Okay.
In the mid-'80s.
Mid-'80s. This is super helpful. So we are here to help you make sure that it is in line with the cost of living index that clearly has increased. All right, thank you so much. Lastly, we have Refuse Department, our favorite commissioner, most responsive, Randy Breitenfeld. If you could
Morning,
introduce
everybody. Yes, my name is Randy Breitenfeld. I'm the Deputy Refuse Commissioner. I guess the biggest item is the trash contract, but as of today, it hasn't officially been decided yet, so I can't really talk much about that.
Okay.
I'd be happy to talk about anything else, though, if you guys...
Well, really quickly, Randy, on the timeline on that, can you tell us when we expect to have a contract signed?
We have to have something signed soon. The current contract expires June 30th.
June 30th, okay. So, I mean, what we're concerned about is whether or not we have to readdress, or, you know, what that figure will look like as far as our budget is concerned. Is what we're seeing in line with that, or I guess is that something you can't speak to right now?
Well, I mean, the proposals that we have out there on the table, it's definitely going to be increasing tipping fees.
Okay, so but it's not something we can discuss today. One thing really quickly, I know we're going through budget cycle on our ward capital budgets, and I know each of us have been asked for $100,000 in the cans.
That's correct.
That's something I wasn't expecting this year. Can you speak to that real quickly?
Yes, so we got roughly about 36,000 alley dumpsters out there and about 43,000 roll carts, and on average, about 10% of them go bad every year. So I used to ask 50,000 from you guys. I need about close to $2 million a year to keep that program running. So with 100,000 from each of you, that's approximately 1.4 mil, and then I also have 900,000 in my budget that I add to that. So that's pretty much how I came up with that number.
I'd like to turn it over to the committee for questions. Alderwoman Boyd.
Hey, Randy.
Alderwoman.
I know we have in refuse, there's a lot of dumpsters down there in your department. So have we disbanded all of those dumpsters?
Every day, between us and our contractor, we're putting out close to probably 130 to 140 dumpsters a week. We started out close to 2,000 service requests. When we started with our contractor, we pretty much run through that whole, we've gone through every ward now. Now we're gonna go back through every ward. I'm hoping with the amount of service requests that I've seen come in, I'm hoping we can be caught up within 3 months. As long as the contractor keeps putting out, 100 plus every week, we should be able to be caught up in 3 months, and then hopefully we'll be able to take that duty on ourselves.
Okay. All right, and so, on this contractor, do you know how long we'll be utilizing them?
Well, like I say, I hope to be done with them in about 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
As long as they're keep working every month or every week, we should be able to get caught up, I'm hoping.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman Oldenburg. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and for being here. I went and toured the facilities that you all work from and saw some issues in the ceiling and the just different building issues. Can you talk a little bit about that in the budget? Any work that'll be done on the building? And I'm trying to find the right page to look at.
As far as our South Refuse facility,
Right.
We just, Waste Management just put a bunch of money into the transfer station, redoing all that, all side panels that needed foundation work. As far as incinerator building and the garage buildings, just, typical wear and tear, just some roof repairs here and there.
Okay.
And I'm working with BPS, but I don't know what's going to happen to that facility. I have
Okay.
all kinds of rumors flying around.
Okay, good. I'll ask some more questions at another time then. I guess one of the things that comes up as we talk about roll carts and alley pickup and whether or not we'd ever switch everybody over to roll cart. And so I guess if that were to happen, at what point would we stop buying new dumpsters? I mean, I guess that's a longer term question. I know that,
Well, you got to keep in mind that one alley dumpster service is 4 residents. So you're talking a lot of roll carts we'd have to purchase.
Sure.
Plus additional carts.
And different trucks and
Different trucks.
huge investment and change.
It would be a huge startup cost.
Right.
To switch over. And not all the city can handle roll carts.
Right.
I mean, if you look at Ward 24, that's, you know how hilly that is over there.
New Ward 4.
Or, I
Yeah.
guess the old Ward 24, yeah. I'm still waiting for my new ward map.
We're gonna have to get you a ward map. I'm not quite understanding why you all don't have a ward map. They're being printed. Okay, but they are available online. Yes, they are available online. Okay. People need printed maps. I understand. Got it. Okay. Well, I really appreciate you being here, and thanks for all you do. You all have been incredible, especially with some of the flooding that's been happening in my ward. Thank you so much for all that you can and you.
Team
have
effort,
done.
believe me.
It was a huge effort, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Alderwoman Saunier.
No questions at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Randy. Just real quickly on the $2 million for the dumpsters, when we talk about what do we collect for refuse fees from residents on an annual basis?
I just think it's the trash fee that we collect.
Correct. What is that total? Do you have that handy?
11 million?
Thought it was
no, you
13.
mean- Yeah, right, but yeah. Is it 11 or 4? I think it's 14 now. $14, yeah.
It's 14, it's 14.
And I think the original $11 fee generated like 15 million for the city.
Okay. And what the department, we have, what do we have allocated total for the department?
Out of that money, that all just
Just
goes.
total.
That just all goes to general.
What is the total for the refuse
Oh,
department?
for the budget this year? I
Correct.
think it's a little over 26 million.
So we have 26 million. Does that include the $2 million for the cans?
That does not include your ward capital money, no.
Okay, so we
That
have
just includes the $900,000 that we get out of the trash fee.
$26 million of refuse.
Correct.
We plus 1.4 million in cans from Ward Capital?
Correct.
Okay, so a total operating department cost of 27.5 million.
About right.
Okay, and we collect between 14 and 15 million from residents.
I know when it was $11 per resident, I'm pretty sure it was around 15 million.
Okay.
That went into general revenue.
So we're currently subsidizing refuse by $10 million a year from the general fund. Is that basically what I'm hearing? It's a lot.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
So that if there's a deficit in trash collection, we're not paying, the fees that residents pay
Oh, yeah, I
doesn't
understand.
cover the cost of
Correct.
trash removal,
Correct,
is what I'm
correct.
getting at, you know. I know people are often really frustrated that we don't collect trash and they're paying for service, but we actually are subsidizing it to some extent. I just was making that clarification, because it does cost a lot of money to remove all the garbage from
Absolutely,
our
yes.
alleys. Okay. All right, thanks, Randy. I don't think we have any further questions, and we have ended this hearing exactly on time.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Okay. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming back. Unless you had anything further you wanted to add before we go.
I don't have anything else.
Okay, great.
Thank you for having
Yes,
us.
thank you, Director. Okay, next up we have CDA. So I think our clerk has been asking everybody that's going to be speaking to sign in. I haven't seen it. It's kind of hard to see from, it's kind of hard to access. CDA, and if you don't mind, just introducing yourself for the committee and the folks at home.
My name is Noel Pfeffer. I serve as Executive Director of the Community Development Administration. And just so everyone can follow along, you all have folders. You all have folders in front of you, and in that folder is this presentation, which we'll be running through today. And we'll just talk about CDA's mission, team, and partners, move on to CDA's budget and funding sources, wrap up with major initiatives, and then turn it over to you all for questions. Can you all hear me well? Great. So our mission at CDA, our job is to serve as a clearinghouse for federal funds for the city of St. Louis, in particular for HUD funds and ARPA funds, although we touch a few other funding sources as well. And we've been charged by Mayor Jones to leverage these funds to drive economic justice, to build affordable housing, to address blight, to fund public services, et cetera. A little bit of history as we get started. CDA was founded in 1974 to administer the Housing and Community Development Act, which established CDBG, home, and other HUD funds. And what it did is that the city consolidated a variety of different development entities, including the Planning Commission, the Office of Business Development, the Beautification Commission, and the Model Cities Corporation. Since then, the development agencies have evolved significantly. SLDC was founded as an independent nonprofit in 1988. PDA was established in 1999 pursuant to ordinance separating the planning function and the fund administration function. And then the Affordable Housing Commission was established pursuant to a public vote in 2001 to focus solely on affordable housing. Another really important piece of history for this body to be aware of is that in 2012, HUD intervened. HUD basically conducted a monitoring visit and said that there's too much political influence in the allocation of CDBG funds and HUD funds, and therefore required CDA to amend and revise its funding process to ensure open and competitive processes and merit-based selection. And that's why since then, actually, HUD convened a meeting with CDA staff and aldermen in this room with the HUD's committee to essentially say, don't reappropriate the CDA funds, go through the selection process, the open and competitive procurement process in order to allocate these funds. And so it's an important piece of history as well. So how are we approaching our mandate? It really starts with economic justice. And you can turn to SLDC's Economic Justice Action Plan. But where that grows out of, in part, is a big survey that the mayor's office did back in 2022 that received over 5,000 responses. And it basically told us to prioritize neighborhood transformation, affordable housing, combating vacancy and blight, and economic empowerment and infrastructure as well. And basically, what we heard from that survey, in the first survey we did back in 2021, we heard direct relief, household relief. In the second survey, a year later, we heard transform neighborhoods, transform the built environment, make change that can last. And that's really what our philosophy here is as we talk about economic justice, which really we divide into three prongs. There's economic empowerment. It starts with people. If you're just changing the built environment but not investing in communities and people, it's not going to be sustainable. And that's why at CDA we do fund a wide array of public services, which we'll talk about in a moment, and have also invested in SLDC's Economic Empowerment Center and are planning broader investments into youth and into, in particular, workforce development in the contracting sector, because that is a constraint on so many of our programs, is that there's not enough contractors. The second prong that we talk about when we talk about economic justice is equitable development. And that really is about knitting the city together with strong commercial corridors, with North-South Metrolink and transit, and strengthening and developing the city on a macro level. But then finally, where CDA really focuses is neighborhood transformation. And that's about housing and blight, and really building resilient, sustainable, equitable communities. And doing all that in a community-driven way, where we're empowering residents to have a voice. We are particularly focused on at CDA on housing justice. That's our bread and butter, is housing production and home repair. And when we look at the city's housing crises, what we see is really three intersecting crises. Because looking at census data, public use microdata sample in particular, we see that the city has about 140,000 households, of whom about 77,000 are tenants and about 60,000 are homeowners. And large percentages of both of these communities are severely cost burdened. When we talk about cost burden, what we mean is that they spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs, on mortgage, utility, rent. And when we see this, we see in particular a population of 26,000 households who make less than 30% AMI. That's about 20% of the city's households, and they are incredibly housing unstable. In fact, between 10 and 15,000 of these households get evicted each year. So again, about 10% of the city's households. And that's because they are severely cost burdened and collectively paying more than $120 million more than they can afford in rent each year. So that's the eviction and homelessness crisis. There's also a broader affordability crisis. And we also see a home ownership crisis, where we know that between 2010 and 2020, the city lost tens of thousands of African-American households, in large part because of the lack of affordable home ownership stock. And so if we want to drive economic justice and reduce disparities and make for a more equitable and sustainable city, we need to create opportunities for home ownership. And so we're really thinking about our investments along that spectrum. Right? Under 30% AMI, how do we provide permanent supportive housing to those who can least afford it? How do we build a broad base of affordability and rental affordability in the city? And also, how do we invest in affordable for-sale home ownership? And so we are really targeting that spectrum and want to build and invest in housing as diverse as our city. Next slide, how do we do all this? CDA has 3 operational divisions. We have a fiscal team, a monitoring team, and a construction team, and a total of about 35 employees literally in the office, and budgeted, the budget in front of you has 49 employees, but as we'll talk about, it doesn't include ARPA employees, which is another 8. But in any case, the fiscal team is our team of accountants who keep the money moving. They review pay requests, they submit pay requests to the comptroller's office, they review the supporting documentation, they help respond to audit requests and make sure everything is in order and compliant. And we are fortunate at CDA to have a fiscal team that has an excellent relationship with the comptroller's office. The comptroller's federal grants manager previously worked at CDA, a lot of CDA staff previously worked at the comptroller's office, and it's a really good working relationship. Second team is monitoring. Monitoring really delivers compliance. They're the ones who help draft the RFPs and the NOFAs, who manage the funding cycles, who review applications, who translate those applications once they're awarded into contracts, who once those contracts are awarded, review and monitor and look at the reports and conduct site visits and provide technical assistance and close out. That is the monitoring team, and they're made up of grants administrators and program managers and community development specialists. And there's different folks working on different funding sources. So we've got some folks who work on HUD funds, some folks who work on ARPA funds, on choice funds, et cetera. Then there's the construction team. And our construction team really manages our construction projects, in particular housing production. And we have a team of analysts and engineers and an architect who review the project's design to ensure they meet quality standards, look at the budget, make sure everything's reasonable, and execute the loan documents, the promissory notes, the deed restrictions, et cetera. And that's our construction team. They conduct site visits as well, and we work with a wide array of partners. And that's something, as we turn to the next slide, that is really critical to remember about CDA, is that we are a clearinghouse. We don't actually deliver the services. We don't build the housing ourselves. We work and manage dozens, likely over 100 relationships in order to deliver these resources to city residents. And we do that through 3 major funding cycles. Historically, it's been 2 major funding cycles. Now with ARPA funds, it's 3 major funding cycles, and truthfully, we're having a lot of little ones as well. There's a lot of minor funding cycles too. But we just recently closed our Neighborhood Transformation Grants NOFA, which made $20 million available for a wide variety of affordable housing, neighborhood beautification, home repair, and other community development activities. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But that's one of our 3. The next one is our housing production NOFA, which closes on June 2nd and makes another $20 million of HUD dollars available for affordable housing. And then finally, in July, we'll be releasing our regular CDBG RFP. And that in particular is focused on public services, although there are other eligible activities as well. And that's where we fund the operating and programmatic costs for small nonprofits that provide youth services or food assistance or senior services or what have you. Moving to the next slide, you can see a sampling of our partners who really run the gamut, and we're so lucky to work with such an amazing ecosystem. Again, whether it's youth or job training and workforce development or reentry or utility assistance or crime prevention or neighborhood beautification or fair housing, we have a great ecosystem here in St. Louis of really capable nonprofits. But we also work, if you turn to the next slide, with a lot of municipal agencies, municipal partners. And that includes the Planning Department, SLDC, the Land Reutilization Authority, the City Councilor's Office and the Problem Properties Unit, the Refuse Division, the Forestry Division, Operation Brightside, CREA, the Department of Health, the Department of Human Services, the Recreation Division, and the St. Louis Area Agency on Aging. And again, we really try to work with these departments to minimize their compliance burden and to deploy these funds for maximum impact. So that, again, is a little bit about what CDA does as background. I'm going to turn now to our budget, which is really what we're here to talk about. And the first thing that I want to make clear about CDA's budget is that every budget is a legal fiction, but this one is particularly so. And what I mean by that is that none of our grant funds show up in our budget. The budget doesn't talk about how CDA deploys funds to all these different partners. The budget only covers CDA's administrative expenses. And in particular, the reason for this is because federal funds are appropriated through separate bills. So each year the Board of Aldermen passes a bill appropriating the CDBG and home and ESG and HOPWA funds. And we pass a bill for choice funds, and we've passed bills for ARPA funds. And so it doesn't run through the budget in the same way. And that's why the budget gives you a very incomplete picture of what CDA does. However, the primary purpose of our budget is really two things. One, it appropriates the economic development sales tax funds, about $2.5 million of those. And the other thing is that it provides a personnel schedule that we send to personnel, and personnel knows this personnel schedule was approved by ENA and the Board of Aldermen, and therefore CDA can hire the folks on this personnel schedule. Those are the primary purposes of the budget before us. It doesn't speak to all our grant programs directly, although obviously it has an impact. When we look at the funds, and we're going to talk about each of these funds a little bit in a moment, we have Fund 1502. That's CDBG. And that's our community development block grants, about $19 million a year in grant funds. And when you pull that out, it's more like 3.5 or 4 million. We actually have a large surplus of administrative funds of CDBG. And so that's 1502. That's the bulk of our administrative budget. In the coming years, we're also going to include CDBG DR funds in there, and that's a special allocation of $25.8 million in disaster recovery funds that we still haven't even gotten formal notice of the award from HUD. It's very preliminary stages, but in the coming year, we'll be putting together an action plan for those CDBG disaster recovery funds to address the July 22 floods. 1503 is home. It's basically special HUD funds. It includes home ARP, the Choice Neighborhoods program, and LED, and again, only includes the administrative fractions of these programs. 1120, as I talked about, is the Economic Development Sales Tax, and 1509 is state and local fiscal recovery funds. And I will flag that in this budget, not even ARPA administrative funds are in this budget. The decision was made to leave ARPA out of this budget entirely, as I'm sure you've heard from other departments. And so this budget and the personnel schedule does not include 8 ARPA-funded positions. Next, I want to mention a few bills that are coming your way for appropriation of federal funds. The first one, Board Bill 28, is a supplemental appropriation of $5 million in choice funds. It's already been filed by Alderman Aldridge and essentially reflects, and we'll talk about choice neighborhoods a little bit more in another slide, but an increase in construction costs, and HUD recognized this increase and therefore provided us a supplemental $5 million award, which needs to be appropriated. The next ordinance that you'll also see is our annual action plan ordinance. That's typically filed late September or early October and includes our CDBG funds, home ARP funds, et cetera. And then there's a few other grant awards that we recently received, including a $500,000 EPA Brownfields grant, a $2.5 million DED Industrial Site Development grant. We were awarded those within the last month, and so you'll see bills appropriating those funds coming down the pipeline. Finally, I want to flag an important requested budget amendment that I'm requesting of the committee and of ENA. And that is that the FY24 proposed budget cut filled positions and added unrequested positions. I think it was a miscommunication because CDA's TO was in flux because I added ARPA-funded positions at the April ENA meeting. And therefore, I think that resulted in an inaccurate amendment to the budget being made, which resulted in 3 positions which are currently filled being stricken from the budget. And so I've received assurances from the mayor's office that this will be resolved either through this process or through an E&A, special E&A meeting, but the fact remains that we need to fix this one way or another.
Director, this is the first we've heard of that, so if it's going to be fixed during this process, I think we need a little more clarity here. Can you describe exactly what you're talking about? So we often as we go into the budgets of these departments, what we often do is kind of look at them in our budget books. CDA is on page 26 of our annual operating plan. And let's see, where can we find it?
Yes, so I've actually provided a fully drafted budget amendment that resolves this issue. And we can walk through it.
Well, I'd like the committee members to be able to look at it in our budget books as well. So let's see, where are we at in our line item detail?
Absolutely. So if you turn to the personnel schedule, let's go there. And look at the personnel schedule under Fund 1502. And what you will see there is a few things. The 3 positions in question. What's that?
Page 64 of the line item.
Thanks, Ryan.
So the first place that you'll see it is the community development supervisor, the community development supervisor, which is position 4127, grade 15M. It's, again, we're looking at Fund 1502 on page 64. It's about a third of the way down the page. Do you see that line? Community development supervisor? And you can see that in FY23, we had 1.6 approved, and you can see that in FY23 we also had 1 position occupied, and you can also see that the budget proposed amount is 0. And so that's the first currently filled position which is not funded in this year's budget. And what you'll also see, weirdly, actually it's funded 0.2. So that's why the budget amendment before you adds 0.8 of a position.
Where is the budget amendment?
The budget amendment should be immediately behind there. You've got it, and it's this one. It's in the packet in the folder. And I also provided CDA's budget in that folder as well. So again, that community development supervisor is 1 position. And again, I'm not actually worried. I'm saying this for my team that may be watching this. I'm not actually worried that this is going to not be resolved. This will be resolved one way or another. I've been assured by the mayor's office, and we're going to avoid actually having to let anyone go. But I think it's important that either through this process or through E&A, we resolve it.
I mean, that being said, I appreciate that, but it would also be helpful if there's changes to the budget that are being promised to departments by the mayor's office or whomever, that is communicated to this committee by those that are making the promises. We actually approve the budget, the Board of Aldermen does, and it's important. It looks like there's a net change of $157,000, or what is the net change here?
It's totally budget neutral.
It's a budget neutral change. Okay, can you help us understand what's going on with the net change to regular employee salaries?
Absolutely. So what we're doing is we're cutting 3 positions that were not requested in the budget, Administrative Assistant 2 and 2 Grants Administrator positions, and then we're adding in 3.8 positions. 3 of those positions are currently filled. 1 of those positions, I'll be transparent with you all, is not currently filled, but I believe I need for recruitment and in order to build the capacity to administer these ARPA funds. Now, this does add $211,000 to the personal services budget, but then we have struck $211,000 from the contractual services budget. And the reason we've struck that is, again, if you look to the budget, you'll see that what was requested in contractual professional services was about $1.197 million, and what was proposed and is currently in the budget is $1.447. So again, there's just this really strange thing where the proposed budget as it exists today has $250,000 more in contractual services than we requested, but doesn't have several of the positions that we requested. So we're just moving that around in a budget neutral way.
Okay, so Director, are we going to go through the rest?
Yes.
What are we doing here?
Well, I paused here because you all had questions. If there's no further questions on this item, I can proceed.
Why don't we proceed with your presentation, and then we'll get to questions at the end?
Great. I just didn't want to bury the lead. So formula grant programs process. Here is just, again, more background about how our funding process works, which I think is important for the board to understand. And this just speaks to how we administer HUD funds. So we start by putting together a 5-year plan. And it covers 2020 to 2024 is the cycle that we're in now. And then we're going to be delivering our next plan next year to HUD that covers 2025 to 2029. So that's one of the reasons why you do see an increase in contractual services in the CDA budget, is because every 5 years we need to put together this big consolidated 5-year plan that includes a market value analysis and an impediment to fair housing analysis and other special analyses that HUD requires us to conduct of the city's housing market. But once we have this 5-year plan, then we hold a public hearing, by the way, in the process of creating this 5-year plan. Everything we do at CDA is required to have significant citizen participation. And then we conduct an RFP. And that's the annual RFP process. And after that RFP, we select who we're awarding funds to based on rating, based on merit. And that turns into an appropriation that goes to the Board of Aldermen. Once that appropriation is approved by the Board of Aldermen, we submit an action plan to HUD. So basically, we have our 5-year consolidated plan, and then we have annual action plans where we say, here's how we're delivering on that 5-year plan. And so we submit that 45 days before the start of the year. Then we do the work with our partners, and then 90 days after the year, we submit a performance and evaluation report to HUD, where we essentially say, here's what we did. So again, it goes 5-year plan, 1-year plan on how we implement it, do the work, and then report back, here's what we delivered. And so that's what we do year in, year out, and there's an appropriation that's a piece of it. And then the key thing from a budget perspective for you all to know is that we're going into the planning phase for our next 5-year plan, and that's going to cost a decent amount of money. Next, we turn to this. I'm going to gloss through these next 2 slides really, really quick, but I just want you all to have this information in terms of CDBG, home, ESG, and HOPWA funds are known as formula grant programs that we get as an entitlement from HUD each year, and this just details their eligible uses. Basically, we need to meet a HUD national objective, which includes a benefit to persons of low and moderate income, elimination of slums and blight, and urgent need. And when we talk about low and moderate income, that means under 80% area median income. And I've included a table here on the slide, and there's also a full table in your packets. ESG and HOPWA, we provide support to DHS and DOH in administering these funds and submit the annual action plan to HUD and other reports. But ESG is administered by the Department of Human Services, and it's to provide shelter and essential supportive services to homeless persons. And HOPWA is administered by the Department of Health and provides funding for the housing needs of persons living with HIV/AIDS. Next, we have a slide on the Choice Neighborhoods program. Again, this is a board bill that's coming before you all shortly, appropriating an additional $5 million. So just a little bit of background. Choice Neighborhoods is an Obama-era signature HUD initiative, and basically has 3 essential pillars. One, it has to be place-based. They don't want to spread the money all around. They want to focus on a particular target geography. Second, it has to be community-driven. And when we won our Choice Grant in 2016, the city conducted over 150 public meetings to put together a transformation plan, which is what was submitted to HUD. And finally, it needs to be leveraged, meaning it's a $30 million award, but it's leveraging a total $240 million housing development. It does have 3 different components as well in terms of where the money goes. $20 million goes towards housing, $4.5 million goes towards people, and that means essentially supportive services for the community who lives in the housing, and $4.5 million goes to neighborhood, critical community improvements. And again, we just got an additional $5 million award because there's been severe construction cost escalation, as I'm sure you all are well aware, between supply chain shortages and increased labor costs. It's really also in a critical geography. We should note the near north side had the highest concentration of public housing in the city and one of the highest in the nation, and remains disproportionately low income, carless, low life expectancy, low access to health insurance, et cetera. And so it's really critical to invest in this neighborhood and community for myriad moral and economic reasons. And then just what the work actually is, it's 695 units that we're building in partnership with McCormick, Baron Salazar on the near north side. And phase 1 is already complete and occupied. Phases 2 and 3 are under construction. Next slide covers our economic development sales tax budget. And this, as I mentioned, is one of the few pieces, pots of funding here which have not been previously appropriated. And so just an implementation update on our FY23 budget. We added a PIO to our office, and he's hired, has been doing great work, Tom Nagel here on my left. We also funded $1 million of LRA-owned historic building stabilization last year, which has been encumbered for Sarah Lou Cafe and Chuck Berry House pursuant to an agreement with LRA. We also, this is all last year, but I'm providing what we've been doing with it, funded a $500,000 vacancy strategy, which has been encumbered with the Vacancy Collaborative, a little more on that later. And then we also set aside $950,000 for neighborhood plan implementation grants, which are a lot like what we're doing right now with neighborhood transformation grants. And what we're doing there is we know this ARPA money isn't going to last forever, and we're just letting it hold there, and we're adding $2 million to it this year so that we can do another big funding round with economic development sales taxes down the line once ARPA funds run out. And that's why this budget provides continued funding for our public information officer, provides an additional $2 million for neighborhood plan implementation grants, provides $500,000 for a workforce development strategy, which we will just help convene and facilitate and administer, but really will be led by Slate and SLDC, and $125,000 in data analysis and graphic design services. Next slide. Here we turn to state and local fiscal relief funds, which is the largest chunk of funds which CDA is responsible for administering. The appropriated funds to CDA total $178 million. They are detailed in this slide here. And what I've included here, and I'm going to run through it at a very, very high level. The following 4 slides provide additional detail, which I'm not going to get into, but we provided all this information as part of our presentation to our subrecipients who work with ARPA funds. And essentially what it shows is what I like to think of as almost an onion of federal compliance regulation that applies to ARPA funds and how we administer them. So the first layer is the bill itself, which essentially sets forth the eligible uses, responding to the negative economic and public health impacts of COVID, premium pay, revenue replacement, and infrastructure. The enumerated infrastructure uses are broadband, sewer, and one other. So that's the first layer of the onion. The next layer of the onion is the Treasury Final Rule, which is a lengthy, the explanation is over 400 pages, rule issued by Treasury that further details what the parameters of what is eligible and what is not are. And also includes—
Director, there's so much information coming at us right now. I think maybe if you could just take a quick step back. What is this, when we're on page 15 here, what are we looking at? What is this onion?
It starts with the bill, then it's the Treasury rule, then there's 2 CFR 200, which is the federal regulations, and then there's the OMB compliance supplement. These are all the rules that CDA staff have to comply with. It's why we need administrative staff. I'm trying to explain the reason why we need our team.
This is for the American Rescue Plan Act.
That's right.
Okay. And this is specific to this pot of money.
That's right. Well, 2 CFR 200 actually applies to everything, as does the OMB compliance supplement.
No, I think, Director, you're being very detailed with us, and I'm certainly learning a lot of information, and I get what you're saying. You want us to understand why you need staff. Maybe you can, just for the sake of time and so that we can get to questions, just kind of stick to what, I understand, like, the administrative thing for our budget, but just kind of stick to what is under our purview.
I think, we're getting so far into the weeds here. I think broadly speaking, what we want to convey here is that CDA is an organization within city government that administers federal funds for projects, broadly speaking, right? Yep. Okay. And so you have your staff, you administer the funds that are in our budget, some of the things that are outlined here. Separately, you also have ARPA funds, and you're administering the ARPA funds. And so at the front end of this, you described how this is not a complete picture of what you have and what you do. So, I mean, before we get into questions to Alderwoman Sonia's point, if you could kind of just walk us through this from a broad perspective, and then we can get into some questions about the specifics.
Yeah. To be honest, we can pause the presentation and turn to questions because the next 5 slides are pretty detailed. Then what we turn to is our major administrative contracts, which details what all the contractual services funds in the budget go to. And so it details the entities which are being funded with these contracts. And then we turn to our major programs, home repair, housing production.
Okay, let's start with the major programs.
All right, so.
What are the major programs that CDA handles?
So let's start with home repair, because I know that that's one which the aldermen get a lot of calls about and is deeply important. So the home repair program is a multi-pronged stool with the city acting as intake and fiscal agent, and that CDA and the building division goes out and monitors. And then we contract with a variety of partners, including Mission St. Louis, Harambe, Habitat for Humanity, and soon to be others under a recent NOFA that went out to provide these services and manage other contractors who provide these services. High level, we repaired 155 homes in 2022. This year to date, we've worked on 176 homes. That increase, that scaling of the program, and we're hoping to hit 300 homes in 23, is a result of ARPA funds. Last year, we spent $22,000 in ARPA funds. This year to date, we spent roughly $1 million. And so that increase is that, but the constraint remains contractors, which we can talk about more in terms of finding contractors to do this work, because there's so much new construction going on and the small stuff slips through the cracks. We have 1,100 people on our waiting list, so we know there's extraordinary need. This is a program that helps keep seniors in their homes, that keeps neighborhoods together, that prevents vacancy. There's 1,126 people on our waiting list. 300 of them will be receiving letters in the next 2 weeks, letting them know that they've been taken off the wait list and are moving forward with their application.
What is the total funding for our home repair program?
ARPA funding, it's $15 million. Annually, it receives about $2 million in HUD funds.
$2 million in HUD. And what is the administrative cost?
The administrative cost is a team of, I don't have my admin budget broken out that way. I can tell you the number of full-time employees, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 5, 6 includes our 2 lead employees. Lead is part of our home repair program because we provide lead remediation services to homes and did 90 last year.
The building division does that work, I was under the impression.
Funded by CDA HUD funds.
Okay, but the building division is actually the entity doing that work.
Right, but there's 2 administrative staff at CDA.
And then there's also administrative staff in the building division?
Well, the building division, yes, construction management, contractor management. Is basically there's admin staff that conducts the intake and determines that people are eligible and does the compliance to HUD. And then what the building division staff are doing is that they're literally going out to the homes, they're taking samples, they're managing the contractors who do the work to ensure it's quality and lead safe.
So we've got the home repair program. What are the other programs, Director? I'm trying to get you through this.
Housing production pipeline.
Okay.
So this is where we actually fund housing production, and we have 148 single-family homes currently in the funding, in the production process, as well as 377 rental units.
Right, but the CDA is not doing this work; they're overseeing it, and we have we through a NOFA or through a RFP process. I just want to make clear that the city and CDA is not actually out here building this.
100%, a clearinghouse, right?
Correct.
And that's exactly what we do. We do a NOFA, we invite developers and contractors to apply, and then we manage the project.
Okay. And what is the total funding for the housing production pipeline?
Again, we don't have this broken out in quite that way because I can provide that to you if that would be helpful to you.
Just be helpful to understand what we're spending. Yep. Sorry, go ahead. And your the other major pieces are?
Our public services. So this is where we fund
over 1,500 youth services, over 1,500 senior services, food access for over 1,000 residents. Again, in partnership, we don't provide these services, absolutely. Workforce development for hundreds of city residents and job training, homeless services, neighborhood beautification, over 600 health screenings, childcare to 93 residents, reentry services, landlord training. It's a long list. And again, this is managed by our monitoring team in this case, and the reason why it's difficult to tell you the exact administrative cost is because CDA staff touch multiple projects, right? So our housing director touches both housing production and home repair, and our fiscal team touches all of it, right? And our monitoring team touches the public services, but they also run our housing admin contract. And so it really is a team, and we work together on this. The next slide is the neighborhood transformation grants, which we spoke briefly about. I'll just share with the committee again in terms of the administrative work that is associated with this, that we've received over $250 million worth of applications for this $20 million in funding, and we're conducting thorough intake, eligibility review, completeness review on all of these before going into rating.
What was the total that you've received? I don't see that on the page.
Over $250 million in funding requests for affordable housing development, for community development of community assets, and for home repair and neighborhood beautification and capacity building. And I also wanted to share that we're being really intentional in terms of how we allocate these funds from an equity lens, and really applying an economic justice index, which collates life expectancy, violent crime rates, health insurance, income, property values, vacancy, education, internet access, percentage minority, and redlining history, to really identify the parts of our city which have been most historically disinvested and marginalized. We are also simultaneously, however, really prioritizing investing intentionally along community assets, and that's why we developed this other map, which is here in your slide, which shows proximity to schools, recreation centers, libraries, post offices, places of worship, grocery stores, transit, healthcare, and really trying to make sure that as we build housing, yes, we're investing in historically disinvested areas, but we're also investing in areas with amenities so that people have can access the things they need. Then there's a really long list of other ARPA initiatives, which I'm going to gloss over, but includes a wide array of SLDC partnerships, including the Economic Empowerment Center, Down Payment Assistance, Contractor Loan Fund, Proactive Development Fund, North St. Louis Grant Fund, which is Board Bill 37, currently before the board. We also have a partnership with the Regional Arts Commission to provide operating artist and program support grants. And in fact, they have received their funding and expect to disperse the first almost $1 million in funds to their nonprofit partners in the coming months. We have a partnership with the Integrated Health Network and the city's 4 federally qualified health centers, which are Cara St. Louis, People's Health Center, Affinia, and Family Care, to build new health clinics across the city and renovate existing ones. Cara STL is building a new one in the Ville. People's Health Center is expanding their Del Mar Wellness Campus. Affinia is renovating their location on Broadway, and Family Care is looking at a new facility on South Grand. Early child care, we have dispersed, and there's a map of the recipients of $2 million in awards of facility support grants to over 50 early child care centers across the city in partnership with the Mental Health Board, and are currently reviewing a RFP for workforce development grants for early child care centers so that we can provide scholarships for early child care teachers and additional salary supplements. And then we also work with Bi-State to provide over 1,000 young people with free transit through 2024. And then the last slide is just our vacancy strategy, which we're working with the Vacancy Collaborative on and are excited about. Questions?
Yeah, all right, thank you, Director. That's a lot to take in. Just from a broad perspective here, we have 49 employees in CDA, is that correct?
49 that were authorized on the budget before you, employed in the office 35.
And then you mentioned an additional 8 ARPA employees?
That's right.
Okay, so why is, what is the difference between the 35 and the 49 and then the additional 8?
I think it's what you see in every city department, that the budget authorizes more positions because we have over 1,000 vacancies across city government.
Okay, so that discrepancy is just a vacancy?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with ARPA. The ARPA is on top of the 49.
Okay. The 49 positions, so we have 2, so the funding, generally speaking, for CDA, all the money that we are giving away or allocating through RFPs, et cetera, is federal funds. we do have $2.7 million coming into CDA from the Economic Development Sales Tax Fund. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that, generally speaking, is equal to what the funding that we provide for the staffing positions. It looks like $2.7 million is what we are funding with staffing to CDA. Is that correct, through this budget?
Roughly, but to be clear, the $2.7 million in the Economic Development Sales Tax funds are primarily grant funds, not administrative funds. That's the one exception because those don't go through a separate appropriation process. So of that $2.7 million, $2.5 million of that is grant funds. So it's not admin.
$2.5 million is grant funding, so in other words, the CBG, all those other funds pay for some of the administration of overseeing them.
Absolutely.
Okay. And with the 8 ARPA folks, hired folks, what is the plan for them after the ARPA's gone?
They were advertised, first of all, only 2 are hired thus far. We're advertising the rest. But they are all advertised as limited term positions through 2026. In addition, however, I'll note, and I mentioned that we have a surplus of CDBG admin funds that we have not spent. And so the idea, my hope, is that we can sort of use that surplus to, through attrition, ensure that no one who doesn't want to leave has to.
Okay, so just going back again over this $2.7 million coming from the Economic Development Sales Tax Fund. Mm-hmm. The $2.7 million coming from that fund, the majority of that fund is then granted back out to the recipients?
Yes.
So we're using the Economic Development Sales Tax Fund to grant out in what capacity?
Yeah, and that's, to be clear, its intent statutorily, it's required that only 20% is the max that you can spend of EcoDevo funds on admin. So we are supposed to then place those towards economic development projects, which is exactly what we're doing. And all this economic development sales tax budget has been approved by the Economic Development Sales Tax Board. But what we're doing is detailed in that slide, which details both last year's budget and then this year's budget, and it includes $2 million of essentially neighborhood plan implementation funds.
Okay. Director, if you don't mind just separating that out for us, because that's the money that comes from the city to the CDA, so it'd be helpful, I think, for me anyway, to understand specifically the city portion of the CDA budget and where that goes.
When you're looking for it separated out, again, we have a slide here, and then it's also separated out in the budget itself. It's Fund 1120. Is there additional information you require?
Can you point me to the slide?
Yes, the slide is
Which number?
It's number 14.
Okay. That is for last year's budget, or was that for this year's budget?
It's both. The first bullet is the FY23 budget implementation update, and the second bullet is the FY24 budget.
Okay. I'll turn it over to the committee for questions. At this point, Alderwoman Boyd.
So much information. You have so much information for us.
Happy to come back anytime.
I guess my question, because I keep seeing the community planning grants and the neighborhood transformation grants, and you said on hold pending award of neighborhood transformation. So exactly how is this working? How is this community planning grant and the neighborhood plan implementation grants, how are these working? Because I know these are 2 new things that you all were trying to do.
Yeah, it's a great question. And let me clarify, first of all, that these are not neighborhood planning grants. Those are administered by the planning department. These are really plan implementation grants, to your point.
Okay.
And it is new. We haven't done it very much before, but it was exactly the intent of the bill. If you look at Ordinance 7435, which was where the economic development sales tax was first placed to the voters, it has an exhibit on it, Exhibit C, which details that 10% of these funds are to be used for neighborhood plan implementation.
And so that's what we're trying to do here. However, what we also recognize is that we have this once-in-a-generation opportunity with ARPA funds. So basically, we've placed $20 million in neighborhood transformation grants towards neighborhood plan implementation. And so while we work to deploy those, which we have to spend those, we have to obligate them contractually by 2024 and spend them by 2026, we don't want to make our job harder by trying to also spend this other money. And so we're letting that, for the moment, hold and build, so that then once we can no longer award ARPA funds, we can issue a large notice of funding availability for these neighborhood plan implementation grants.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Alderman Oldenburg.
No questions at this time, thanks.
Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you. Thank you for that thorough presentation. I think most of my questions would be programmatic questions, but no questions on the budget. I understand you need a lot of people to administer these funds, so thank you so much.
Alderwoman Saunier.
Hello. Today I wasn't in foreign land all the way because you and some of your team at orientation for some of the new alders kind of talked about a lot of this. So thank you for that, because I would be totally lost if we did not have that preliminary introduction. For me, I think one of the things I want to do, since I know people are watching at home, one of the things I've seen the most is the neighborhood transformation grants. A lot of different neighborhood organizations in the ward I represent have applied for them. I've gotten asked for letters of support. So I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about those neighborhood transformation grants, especially because what I like about that is it puts people in the community at the center of deciding what their community needs and what their community wants. So I'd just love for you to just speak to that a little bit more.
Thank you, Alderwoman. And yes, it's a really exciting program, and we've just been thrilled by the response that we've seen in the community. I don't think we were expecting over $250 million in applications, but we did really design it intentionally to be a uniquely flexible source of funding that could be designed to meet the community's needs. We didn't want to go out and say, this is exactly what we're looking for and fit your idea into this box. We really wanted to crowdsource the best ideas from the community. And I'll say, even though we're only awarding $20 million, it's a lot of money to administer, but even though there's a large difference, obviously, between the $20 million which we're awarding and the $250 million in needs, I hope that it makes the case for programs like this moving forward. And I'll also share that I think we have an opportunity with the $37 million North City grants program, which will be administered by SLDC, to take some of the best practices that we're learning. Because let me tell you, we've learned so much just in the beginning of this process, and we're going to learn a lot more as we dig into these contracts. Each project is going to raise unique questions in terms of, do we characterize this entity as a subrecipient or a contractor or a beneficiary, and what eligibility requirements and reporting requirements do we attach to different kinds of programs in order to ensure federal compliance. And so we're learning, and we want to take everything that we learn and pass it on to SLDC as they issue this next round of North City grants, so that it can really reach the people who need it and make resources available. I'll also share that something we've thought about is turning to other funders. Since we have gone through this process of crowdsourcing amazing ideas, why not then put together packages and share them with other funders, public and private and philanthropic, to see whether we can work together to leverage the city's commitment. Because I do expect, I'll be honest, to make very few full awards and a lot of partial awards. And so where the city is making partial awards, it's an extraordinary opportunity to partner with private and philanthropic partners.
And will we get, as you all make those decisions, going through the applications, figuring out what you fund, everybody will be notified of?
Absolutely. So what we'll do is, right now, we are in the intake and review process, where we're just reading through every application, determining which entities are eligible, which aren't, which applications are complete, which aren't, so that we can proceed from there into rating. Once we rate, and then we'll make our preliminary recommendations based on those ratings, and we'll essentially set tranches, right? So above a certain rating amount will be fully funded, except, again, I think that's going to be a pretty high bar. In between a certain rating, it'll be partially funded. Below, it won't be funded. Once we have those preliminary and provisional funding awards, we're going to release those, announce those publicly, and then hold a town hall where we welcome input. Once we hear that input and feedback, we'll review, see if we got anything wrong, if there's any factors or any data or information that we were missing about a project, and release our final funding awards.
Do you have a timeline in mind? And give me a far, far date.
Let me tell you this. We are absolutely going to make the housing awards in August before the LIHTC deadline. Honestly, initially I'd planned to make all awards simultaneously in July or August. Given the volume of applications and how stretched we are, I'll be transparent that the beautification and community and capacity building grants may have to come on a month or two down the road, just because honestly that's the largest category with the most applications.
But potentially by November, you'd like?
Oh, certainly by the end of the year, yes. Okay. And ideally sooner, and again, housing awards we will make in August.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you too for all of it is a lot of information, but you took the time to put it together. I mean, I don't think it'll take us some time to probably look through, but I'll certainly keep this handy before I email you questions. I'll refer to this. So thank you for that. And I feel like some of your passion and excitement is coming through. I just wanted to make sure that people at home are not as familiar with this type of work or these type of jargons are also able to understand what is going on and what's being explained.
Absolutely.
Hey, thank you, Director. All right, a couple quick questions. The neighborhoods that are involved in the neighborhood plan implementation, do you have those? Or is that something that's still in the works?
It's still in the works. You're talking about the economic development sales tax dollars. The key for an entity to be, for a neighborhood to be eligible is to have a plan approved by the Planning Commission within the last, I think we'll set the date once we're closer to the date in terms of releasing those funds. But if your neighborhood has recently passed a neighborhood plan and that plan has been approved by the Planning Commission, that's what triggers eligibility.
Okay, I think a lot of neighborhoods need some assistance on that front, so I'd like to.
That's the other reason why we're waiting.
Okay. So one of the things that I think we should appreciate here is that CDA is an organization that essentially redistributes money from the federal government. We also have the SLDC, which is also redistributing funds, as you mentioned, the small business grants, which there's recently been some discussion, at least in the public sphere, about those grants and maybe a fix that is necessary to get those funds out the door. And then we have the Affordable Housing Commission. So we have these separate sort of entities all distributing grant monies for housing, for economic development, for planning. And, I don't know that there's a lot of coordination here and understanding, what's being done. To me, it reads like some siloing, why these entities are separate and not necessarily integrated with one another, specifically with the planning department and some of these other departments that are kind of organizing on the front end. Then on the back end, all of the street department, et cetera. I think what maybe we could try to help facilitate moving forward is some coordination, and from our understanding, when we're talking about infrastructure like street repair, et cetera, knowing where these investments are going to go, so we can kind of help shore them up from the funds that we have and the oversight that the Board of Aldermen has. We'd like to facilitate that. So. Obviously, CDA plays a very important role in redistributing a lot of federal funds, just recognizing that there are other entities that do similar and overlapping work here.
May I comment on that?
Sure, please.
I entirely agree that the city, we are extremely siloed. We take the principle of separation of powers to a pretty radical extreme. But I do believe that in the development agencies and under Mayor Jones' leadership, we have achieved an unprecedented level of coordination. At 1520, CDA, SLDC, and the planning department, we're all in the same office. We're all in the same suite. We meet weekly to discuss the intersection between our work, because you're right, it intersects deeply. And as I covered in the history, it really is a kind of decision that city leaders before us have taken in terms of, in 1988, establishing SLDC, in 1999, establishing the planning department, 2001, establishing the Affordable Housing Commission. So I agree that there's a lot of different entities, but we work very closely together.
Encouraging to hear. Okay, do we have any additional questions from the members of the committee?
No, we're going to talk later about the employee reallocation or moving around.
Yeah, it sounds like it did not appear that way from the budget amendment, it appeared that it was not revenue neutral, but if it's revenue neutral, then that is something that the Board of E&A can handle, just a redistribution without really.
That is the intent, and to once again walk through it, it does add $211,000 to our personal services budget in Fund 1502, but it then also cuts the same amount, $211,190 in our contractual services budget.
With that, I think this concludes our hearing for today. With that, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Hearing no objection, the Budget and Public Employees hearing is adjourned.